What a difference a decade makes. 10 years ago, as we prepared to ring out the noughties, Britain was in the grip of a financial crisis after an excess of good living had turned sour. Gordon Brown's government was in its death throes, its desperate economic position highlighted the following year by the outgoing Chief Secretary to the Treasury Liam Byrne leaving his successor an infamous "I'm afraid there is no money" note. Nor were things much better on a social cohesion front. Years of untrammelled immigration, deliberately fostered by a Labour government that saw a social as well as economic benefit to migration through the advancement of multiculturalism, had led to deep unease in parts of the country. These areas, principally in the North and Midlands, had long been suffering from economic dislocation, and were now facing a social challenge as well given the absence of any kind of effective integration policy to greet the new arrivals to our shores. The situation was to be summed up by Brown's gaffe in calling Rochdale resident Gillian Duffy a bigoted woman for having raised immigration when he met her on the 2010 campaign trail, though it had already been encapsulated by the explosion of Islamist radicalisation in the latter part of the decade. In foreign policy, Britain remained ensconced in Iraq and Afghanistan, with the political playthrough from those conflicts poisoning the foreign policy debate in general.And while there may have been a quiet sense of schadenfreude that we had escaped the carnage of the Greek sovereign debt crisis that was now threatening the very fabric of the Eurozone, the idea that we might one day leave the European Union was no more than a glint in Nigel Farage's eye.But as 2009 gave way to 2010, one thing was apparent: a great unease had enveloped the nation. Years of living beyond our means on cheap credit had caught up with us, and the only certainty was that we would have to pay for our economic profligacy through belt-tightening. Britain was uncertain of what it was and what it should be doing overseas. It has taken an entire decade to unwind the legacy of the previous one. Austerity proved to be the relentless drumbeat of the 2010s, a tune that has only just finished playing. Brexit had many fathers, but one of them was the Northern and Midlands backlash to mass immigration and the failure of successive governments to take those regions' economic and social concerns seriously. Britain played a starkly different role internationally. The Libyan intervention was balanced out by a Syrian non-intervention that contributed to the mass migration flows to mainstream Europe that so alarmed voters here, and by our bafflingly commitment to an Iranian nuclear deal that is no longer worth the paper it is written on. Now it has been abandoned by the US. Where once foreign and security policy was at the heart. For more on this story, visit the news article link.